Welcome, boils and ghouls. Tonight, I have a flesh-peeling tale for you about a man who took a little soul-searching trip to the desert, but instead found something looking to borrow his face. He ignored the warnings, thinking they were just a bunch of wishful thinking. But oh, how grave his mistake was. So grab your shovels, my fiends, and prepare to dig into the skinned and stirred horrors of the Skinwalker.
It started with a warning, one I didn't take seriously. Never wander too far into the desert alone, especially after dark. Some things out there aren't meant to be seen. Old Navajo stories, I'd thought, as if the wisdom of generations was just superstition, something meant to be brushed aside. But now, with the chill creeping up my spine, the hairs on my arms standing on end, I wish I had listened. I told myself it was just my imagination, just the desert playing tricks. But with every crack of dry earth beneath my boots, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was tightening around me, like a noose I hadn't noticed before. Because something is watching me from the shadows, and it's wearing a face that isn't its own. A twisted, unnatural face, like a mask never meant to be worn. It feels like it's crawling under my skin, waiting for me to make a move. I grew up hearing the legends of the Skinwalker, a witch, a shapeshifter, able to take on the form of any animal or person it kills. People in town spoke of them in hushed tones, usually around a campfire after a few drinks. I used to roll my eyes, dismissing it all as superstition, a convenient way to explain the unexplainable. At 29, I was a man of reason, grounded in facts, not folklore. But that was before I moved into my uncle's old cabin, deep in the heart of the Navajo reservation, isolated from the nearest town. My uncle had always warned me about the land, about the things that lingered when the sun went down. I never listened, thought it was just another old man's tale, another piece of inherited fear. The desert stretched out for miles in every direction, a vast expanse of nothingness, under a sky so clear that you could count the stars. It was beautiful, but in a way that felt almost wrong, like something was waiting just out of sight. I'd moved out here to clear my head, to escape the chaos of city life, where everything screamed for attention. The cabin was a family inheritance, and after my uncle's mysterious disappearance years ago, I figured it would give me time to think, time to be alone. But now I realize solitude isn't freedom. It's a cage. It's a place where the silence becomes louder than the noise ever was. It started small at first. A few nights in, I heard noises just outside the cabin, a low rustling, almost like footsteps, but uneven, dragging itself through the sand, as if whatever was out there was struggling to move. I told myself it was coyotes or maybe a wild dog, but the unease gnawed at me, the air feeling thicker, more oppressive with each passing moment. I brushed it off, trying to convince myself that the desert had a way of playing tricks on the mind. When I checked outside, there was nothing there, just the cool desert breeze and the soft whisper of the wind, things that felt too quiet, too empty, like the world was holding its breath. The next night, I saw it, or at least I thought I did. A shadow moved in the distance, just at the edge of the moonlight. It was too tall to be an animal, too fast to be human. It didn't make sense. My instincts screamed that it was wrong, that something about it wasn't right. I stood frozen on the porch, gripping the old rifle my uncle had left behind, the cold metal digging into my palm. I didn't know if I was waiting for the thing to come closer, or for the night to swallow it whole. My heart pounded in my chest, but it wasn't just fear I felt. It was the oppressive weight of realization. The desert wasn't empty. It had been waiting for me all along. I tried to rationalize it, maybe a trick of the light, the isolation playing with my mind, or the wind pulling at the edges of my sanity. But when the sun rose the next morning, something shattered my calm. Paw prints, massive, unmistakably like those of a wolf, but they led straight to the cabin door, then vanished as if swallowed by the earth. But it was the footprints beside them that made my blood run cold. Barefoot, the deep impressions almost too deliberate, as though someone had stood there, waiting, staring. Legends flooded back, not as whispers this time, but as clear, searing memories. The Skinwalker could become anything, anyone. It could wear the skin of the dead, take the shape of those it murdered, and the closer it got, the more I felt its presence, its hunger, a gnawing, gnashing need that seemed to echo in my bones. As the days passed, the noises grew louder, closer, the shadows darker. They weren't just silhouettes anymore. They were shapes, grotesque and shifting, like something alive. It wasn't just watching me anymore. It was hunting me, a predator that knew every step I took, every breath I made, as if it was inside me, always there, lurking, waiting to strike. I barely slept, too terrified to close my eyes, as if sleep itself was a doorway I couldn't afford to open. Each night, the whisper whispers outside grew louder, voices, insistent, calling my name in the dark. At first, I told myself it was just the wind, but then I remembered my uncle. I remembered how he had grown obsessed with the Skinwalker before he disappeared. His letters were filled with frantic, almost illegible scrawls, warning me about something that stalked him in the night, its eyes glowing in the dark. I had dismissed him as paranoid, maybe even losing his grip on reality. But now, standing in the same cabin where he had once feared for his life, I understood his terror.
I couldn't leave. I couldn't escape. It wouldn't let me. The car wouldn't start, the engine sputtering like it was suffocating, and the roads were impassable, too dangerous to walk through the desert at night, where the land itself seemed to conspire against me. And every time I looked out the window, I saw them, those glowing eyes, watching from the distance, waiting for the perfect moment, not just observing, but tracking. The hunt had begun, and I was its prey.
On the seventh night, the tension finally snapped. I awoke to the sound of scratching at the door, slow, deliberate, each scrape sending a chill down my spine. It wasn't the hesitant paw of an animal. No, this was something calculated, something that understood fear. My breath caught in my throat as I gripped the rifle, the cold metal shaking in my hands. The stillness of the night seemed to hold its breath as I inched toward the door. Every step felt like 1,000, each heartbeat thundering in my ears. With one last shaky breath, I flung the door open. Nothing, just the vast emptiness of the desert, the kind of silence that screams in your ears. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure, hunched, twisted, its movements unnatural, like it was forcing its body into shapes it wasn't meant to make. It was crawling toward me on all fours, its limbs contorting in ways that made my stomach churn. The worst part wasn't its body, it was its face. It was my uncle's face, but wrong, so wrong. The skin stretched and warped, the features contorting and twisting with each agonizing movement. His eyes, no, the thing's eyes, were black as coal, hollow pits that seemed to suck the light from the desert around it. I stumbled backward, raising the rifle, but my limbs felt like stone, paralyzed by terror. The thing stopped in front of me, its head tilted unnaturally to the side, and it smiled. A smile too wide for any human face, its lips peeling back to reveal rows of jagged, gleaming teeth. Its grin wasn't just horrifying, it was mocking. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't just after me. It was me. It spoke, my uncle's voice. Soft, familiar, but warped, distorted, like it was being torn from a broken radio. "You didn't listen." The words crawled into my ears, dripping with venom. "You should have left. You should have stayed away." The voice crackled with static, each word a jagged whisper, like a razor cutting through my mind. The Skinwalker lunged, and in a panic, I fired. The shot echoed across the desert, shattering the stillness. But the moment it rang out, time seemed to stretch, to bend. Everything went still. For a moment, it was as if the world itself had frozen in disbelief. The creature collapsed, its grotesque body jerking violently before it hit the ground. Then the real horror began. The thing I thought I had killed didn't die. It shifted, its body contorted, bones snapping and rearranging with sickening cracks, each movement more horrifying than the last. It was no longer my uncle. It was nothing and everything at once. Faces melted into each other, skin pulling and twisting into grotesque shapes. There were eyes where there shouldn't have been, and mouths opening where they shouldn't be able to. It was an abomination, a nightmare made flesh. And then I understood. It wasn't just copying. It was becoming everything. Every fear, every monster, every twisted memory I had ever buried. It was a nightmare incarnate, stitched together from the deepest corners of my mind, and I had fed it. I ran. There was nothing else I could do but run. The creature's screeches were like claws scraping against my mind, echoing through the still desert air. My feet pounded the cold sand, but it felt like the ground itself was swallowing me, pulling me back toward the nightmare I was trying to escape. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The air was thick with its presence, its shifting form a blur behind me, twisting in and out of shapes, like a living shadow that knew no bounds. It was close, closer than I dared to imagine, a predator with no end. But then something changed. The faintest glimmer of light touched the horizon. The first rays of dawn pierced the darkness, spilling across the desert like a cleansing fire, and with it, the creature's shrieks faded into the wind, its form flickering as if it was being torn apart by the light. The desert, which had felt so alive with its presence, suddenly seemed empty. I stumbled to a halt, breathless, Disoriented, as the sun rose higher, the creature vanished, disappearing as if it had never been. I collapsed onto the sand, gasping, staring at the empty stretch of desert before me. Was it really gone? Or had it simply retreated, waiting for the next night? I didn't know.
The silence felt heavier now, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of something unfinished, something that had been left unresolved. The Skinwalker had not just been a creature from the stories, it had been something deeper, something that would always be a part of me. And as I stood there, in the desert light, I understood. I had been a part of its story all along. I reached the main road hours later, exhausted, my body broken, but it was my mind that felt shattered. I couldn't escape the weight of what I'd seen. I told the few strangers I met about what happened, but no one believed me. Not that I really expected them to. Who would? The things I'd witnessed were too impossible, too horrific to be real. But I knew. I felt it deep inside me, in the marrow of my bones. The Skinwalker wasn't gone. It was waiting, somewhere in the shadows, biding its time. It had never truly left. Its presence lingered like the smell of death, a stench that wouldn't wash away.
I'm leaving the cabin behind, just like my uncle tried to. He'd been right about so many things I'd never listened to. But now I wonder, will it ever really let me go? Can it? Or has it already marked me, branded my soul in ways I don't even understand? The legend of the Skinwalker isn't just a story, it's a warning that I will carry with me for the rest of my life, no matter where I go. Because no matter how far I run, no matter how far I travel, I will always be haunted by it. It knows me, and worse, it will never forget.
Well, wasn't that a face-lifting experience? Our poor desert dweller learned the hard way that sometimes solitude isn't so peaceful. It can be downright fatal. And that Skinwalker looks like it just couldn't resist some face-to-face fun. Now, my little creeps, don't be shy shifting. If you liked tonight's twisted tale, howl about giving it a thumbs up, leave a comment before the Skinwalker steals your voice, and morph your way over to that subscribe button. Who knows? Stick around, and maybe next time you'll be the star of the show.